The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back talking vintage sports from the old garden in New York on 49th Street. Nedick's at that. I'm Ralph Tyko. Kind of a somber night. Just found out. Let me introduce everyone first. Hal Bock, Associated Press. How are you, sir?
I'm here, boys. Yeah, I'm here.
Good. David Hubler, author.
Yes, hi. I'm here.
Tour, Bronxite, and a million other things. Al Blumkin, Maven. How are you, sir?
Fine.
Good. George, you have a guest for us tonight. David, you have a guest for us tonight.
Right. Yes.
Please introduce him.
Yes, Stanley Cohen is a old friend of mine, a fantastic author who's done numerous books, including probably one of the best, the game they played about the 1950 college basketball.
Oh, I read that years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have it. I have this. And he also did a book on the Dodgers.
And a book on the Dodgers, right? Yeah. Brooklyn Dodgers. So Stan is here. Spent a lot of time in the old garden.
Right now on my desk, one about the 1930s Yankees. That'll be due on opening day of 2018. I'm just going through correcting the proofs.
Oh.
And give us a title. Give us a title.
The title is Baseball's Greatest Dynasty, the 1936 to 39 Yankees.
Okay. Can we argue the 49 to 53 dynasty?
Of course. That's what it's all about.
Oh, beautiful. You're not married to it, in other words. You're not, yeah, beautiful. We'll talk about that. You'll come back with many shows on this network that you'll fit right into it. So, welcome.
Thank you.
And Stan also knows Harris Field.
I just had a discussion on the 51 scandals with a friend of mine yesterday.
Oh. Never die somehow.
Yeah.
No. There's one, if you didn't like that scandal, there's a basketball scandal every 10 years.
So that's true.
Oh, the one 10 years later was even bigger. That was the Jack Medina scandal.
Yes.
Yeah.
1961.
May I introduce you, George Grimm. How are you, George?
Hi, guys. We're okay.
Good. So with the full house, so much to talk about. I'm going to start with George because he wrote several books on the New York Rangers, and they are right up there with the Knicks for the Garden attendees. Ned Irish owned the Garden back in those days. Did he own the Rangers too, gentlemen?
No, he was president of the Garden. He was never president of the Rangers. They had John Hammond and they had Bill Jennings around that time.
When I worked for the Rangers, they were owned by the Graham Page Corporation.
Right.
Now, who was Graham Page? That I couldn't tell you. But Ned Irish, as George said, Ned Irish was the president of the Garden, but they were owned by a corporation. There was an Admiral John Bergen, who was a major domo in that, and Ed Ost was also involved in that. So the ownership was kind of sketchy, but they had the two teams. They had the Knicks and the Rangers, and they did very well. I know we sold out the Ranger games. The attendance was 15,925 every Wednesday, every Sunday. We sold.
And I was there many of those Sundays.
George, you were probably in the crowd, right?
Yeah, sure.
I was there. Me too. I was there on my GO card, my high school.
That's right.
You got in with that card, you'd spend 75 cents, and you'd sit on the end balcony.
I was a little bit later. I was like $1.50.
Or in the upper deck.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
So
we used to get there about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
On a Sunday afternoon, we got there about 3 o'clock. There was only one entrance that was open for the people who had the GO cards. And as soon as they opened the gate, you would race like hell up all the flights of stairs to the top, and then you'd race down to the front row, because beyond the first row, you couldn't see all of the ice.
Now, first row, you had to look through. You got to look through the bars. First row.
Yeah, but you could see the right.
Yeah.
You could see all the ice. But from the second row back, you missed all the ice that was down on top under you. And people would get there really early, and you'd save seats for all the other guys who were going to come later. So.
And what a feast for an autograph collector as a kid. 16, the original 6 and the original 8 in basketball. So one knew literally every player in both leagues and who was being called up from the minors to replace them if they were hurt or not doing well. And they were all, for the most part, very generous with their time. Hockey players, especially for kids, they left all the aggression out on the ice, and in general, life's generalities, they're the most accommodating athletes, autograph-wise.
That's because they're not American.
Yeah, and they were the most underpaid too of all the sports. I think those guys hardly made any money at all.
And to this day, their unions suck. They don't protect their best interest. I know there was a big scandal. Somebody ran off with union dues.
You're one of the union heads.
One of the union heads, right.
Alan Eagles.
Yes.
Alan Eagles.
Alan who?
Alan Eagleson.
That was
Alan Eagleson. He wound up in
Eagleson,
jail.
yeah, that's it, yeah. The name escaped me, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think they recovered the gelt, though. That's
probably not.
Yeah.
Bobby Orr's age.
Even though both teams were owned by the Garden, the Rangers and the Knicks, there's a pretty good rivalry between those two franchises for top dog in the building. And the Knicks, because New York essentially was a basketball and is a basketball town, the Knicks usually got the best dates and had they had the upper hand when it came.
And they used to get Tuesdays and Saturdays.
Yes.
And the Rangers had Wednesdays and Sundays.
That's true.
Okay.
And I remember when they used to lay the basketball court on top of the ice.
Yes.
And
they still do.
Yeah. Do they really?
They just had a doubleheader a week or so ago.
Jeez,
I didn't know. Even in the new Garden, they do that as well.
Yeah, they just had one about a week ago. The Knicks played in the afternoon. The Rangers played at night.
Wow.
See, I remember as kids, they want you to clear out between games, obviously, so they could sell new tickets. We'd hide in the bathrooms, run around from security, and got to watch them setting up the ice and what have you. That's fair Arbiton.
Yeah. Ralph, do you remember playing cup hockey between periods? Guys would go out into the hall and they'd use soda cups and crush them into like a small hockey puck, and they'd play. One guy would be the goalie, and another guy would be kicking. They used to play that all the time between periods. The guys would leave their seats and in the hallways.
I remember that.
Yeah,
that's
cup
one
hockey.
Yeah, but again, the show's named after Nedick's. We all hung at Nedick's at one time or another. We all enjoyed the orange soda, and the hot dogs were damn good.
That's right.
Yeah, we used to refer to that as the Orange Room.
Right, that's right. We used to call
really, if you really had a few bucks, you went across the street to the Garden Cafeteria, which had a terrific menu and wonderful cake, dessert. Oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah, but we used to call the Orange Room Nedick.
What's that?
All we were doing is trying to save up enough money, the 75 cents to get in, the tokens to get back and forth, and some money for the Hockey News.
There you go.
That was a great publication, and I missed them days. Authors, Stan and George. Podcast is Shameless Self-Promotion. Talk about your book. Start with George, and where one can get it, and tell us something about the book that we might find interesting. George.
Okay, well, the book is called We Did Everything But Win. It's about the Emil Francis era Rangers. You can get it at Cosby's, and you can get it at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. The book is a year-by-year a trip through the Emil Francis years. A lot of interviews, a lot of time with Emil. Emil was just a wonderful man to me. He gave me a lot of time.
He wrote the foreword of your book, sir.
Right. A lot of interviews with the earlier Rangers, Bob Nevin, Donnie Marshall, Phil Goyette, the Rangers as they moved on, Brad Park, Kachuk, Bill Fairburn, Steve Vickers, Gene Carr, Derek Sanderson, all those guys, and they were all very good to me. I just called them cold sometimes, and they gave me time, and they made me feel like an old friend, and that was what really helped me, because these were all guys that I grew up watching. They were my heroes when I grew up, and to be able to pick up the phone and call them and talk to them and ask them questions, that was just a wonderful thing, So, and,
you mentioned Bob Nevin. Could you address both you and Hal and Al Blumkin too was a hockey fan back then. The Bathgate trade, Andy Bathgate, I think Nevin, and who else came over? Was it Donnie Marshall that came over?
No, Don McKinney.
In that one?
Don McKinney. Isn't that
okay.
right, George? Don McKinney?
Right, Don McKinney went to Toronto with Bathgate, and we got Nevin, we got Arnie Brown, Rod Sealing, we got another forward. I can't think of his name right now. The funny thing about that is that the Rangers were playing up in Toronto that night, on a Saturday night, and Bob Nevin told me that King Clancy called him before the game and told him that, that afternoon he got traded, and, he should go to the other team's dressing room that day. Good luck. So, and this was all I heard about it, So.
Yeah. That trade made a lot of headlines. Nevin was good, very good defensive player, if I remember correctly. Solid. But the Rangers, they did everything but win in those days. There was.
You mentioned Andy Bathgate. That was my era. Was Bathgate, Louis Fontanato, Harry Howell, Gump Worsley. That was
Dean Prentice was.
Dean Prentice, yeah, all of those guys.
Andy Heppenson.
And and of course the Canadians used to come in and just dominate because they had Maurice Richard and they had Henri Richard. Those guys, and Jacques Plante was the Canadians goalie, and I think he was the first one. Dickie Moore, right? Yeah, those
Boom, Jeffrey on Belleville.
Yes,
they had every French Canadian went there.
Oh God, and they were such a powerful team, and
you guys have rattled off a number of names of popular Rangers, but you left out one, Camille Henry.
Oh yes,
yes.
Camille was traded
penalty killer
by Emil Francis. Was traded to the Chicago Blackhawks in a deal that brought the Rangers Ted Irvin. And it was a very unpopular deal because Cammy was a really popular player. And now I'm covering the first game after the trade. And Emil was under a lot of pressure and a lot of criticism for trading popular player like Camille Henry. And he was asked about it in the interview room after the game or before the game. I guess it was after the game. And he really got steamed about it to the point where I thought we were going to get, not me because I don't fight, but I thought he was going to get into a fight with another writer because he was defending this trade, a very controversial trade. And happily for all concerned, there were no punches thrown, but it was a tense moment, let's put it that way.
Yeah. Can well imagine. What was the best trade the Rangers ever made, guys?
Probably when they brought in Mark Messier in 90.
Yeah, that's right. Was that a trade or a free agent signing?
He was. I think he was traded. I think we sent Bernie Nichols out to
Edmonton. Okay.
Yeah, I think. But
well,
that really paid off. No.
When did the leagues expand? Because I joined the Air Force in '65 in November, and if I recall, there were just
66, 67 was the last league of the six. Last year of the 6 teams. 67, 68.
I remember going out west.
I just finished reading
out west.
Noah's book
on
hockey
out
Penguins,
west.
and he discusses that. Yeah.
My point was that 6-team league was so diluted that I'm reading in the paper 5-6 years later about some of the solid NHL players, and they included names like Larry Cahan, and I realized that these guys were good. They just weren't good in comparison to the other 6 teams, but whatever. But once the league was diluted, there was some high-quality hockey. Do you think expansion came too fast, guys?
Well, I think that you can't, in my mind, you can't double the size of the league in 1 year. They added 6 teams in one fell swoop.
Right.
They doubled the league size, and that's a lot of players to have to add. Now, given you were right, in the 6-team era, there were a lot of players who played in the American Hockey League who could easily have been in the NHL, but they were blocked because there were only 6 teams, and the 6 teams had 18 skaters, and that was it, But when they doubled, all these players had an opportunity to get into the NHL. But I just don't think you can double its league size in 1 year. And now, of course, I don't know, 30 teams or
31 with Las Vegas.
It's insane.
31 with Las Vegas,
Well, it mirrors the other sports, baseball, basketball.
What do you guys? You guys are much more adept about the NHL hockey. But I remember years and years ago, before we even had our own TV, visiting. I guess it was my uncle, and they were showing the Rovers game from Madison Square Garden. There was an old New York Rovers.
Yes, that was called the Eastern Hockey League. I went to one game when I was a kid. My father took me there. It was the Eastern Hockey League. It was like almost like a weekend league, like the way the Eastern Basketball League was.
And they were in the Garden. They played in the Garden then.
Yeah, they played in the Garden.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
also had the Long Island Ducks, who were in I think it was the Eastern League as well, and they played here on Long Island. They played in the Comac Arena. Gilles Villemure, who later played for the Rangers, played for the Ducks. I believe Jockerman may have played for the Ducks as well.
I think Villemure played for the Rangers before he played for the Ducks, though, Hal.
Okay, I'll buy that.
I mean, just because I remember him being a backup to Jacques Plante.
Yeah. I remember one of the players of the Rovers being Vic Howe, the brother of Gordy, who was, not quite as good.
No.
Who was?
Yeah.
Quite a breeder, too, that Gordy Howe. He had two all-star sons play hockey.
I read his autobiography a couple of years ago, and he always took the attitude going into camp, no matter how many awards and how many Yeah, whatever he had, he was always playing for in camp like he was playing for a job.
Well, it's quite an attitude. That what made him great. Hockey's a sport.
I have a quick story about the old NHL, and I remember this so clearly. The old six-team league, there wasn't much fat in the way of extra players or money or anything. And I know in Madison Square Garden, for those games between the Rangers and their opponents, there was one fellow who was actually a TV cameraman for the old WABD, which was Channel 5, the Dumont network in New York. And he would go to every game. His job was he was going to be the substitute goalie. If one of the goalies got hurt, he would go downstairs and suit up. It didn't matter which team it was, the Rangers or the visitors. And then he would, because they only carried one goalie. So he would go downstairs, and it didn't happen very often. And I don't even remember being there when it actually did happen. But he was there, and that was his job, to be ready to go in and play goalie for either side.
Wow. I came up with a great question for Hal Bock.
Joe Schaefer, Dave, and he was out of shape. He had no business being on the ice if he had to go on the ice, but that's who he was. I know who you're talking about.
Do you remember his name?
Over you, Hal. What was his name?
Joe Schaefer, like the beer.
Yeah. Okay, and may I ask if you included he and other substitute goalies in your encyclopedia, and if you were able to get
the standard for the encyclopedia, as I recall, and it's many, many years ago, the standard was if you played a game, you were in the encyclopedia. Now, of course, that would change today because with 31 teams, there's an awful lot of guys who get to play a game. So in those days, when you had 6 teams, there was a limited number of players in the encyclopedia.
Right.
I'll bet he was in there because
put in the substitute goalies.
Probably in there. I don't know, but he probably is.
Oh.
That time, too, the Rangers had a practice goalie named Arnie Knox. And he wound up being a cameraman for the Super Sales show later on. So that might be the guy that you were talking about before.
No, we're talking about Schaefer.
Well, Schaefer
that
was
might have been Black Fang,
the emergency goalie.
That was Black Fang or Whitetooth on Super Sales.
He was a manager for an office supply company in Long Island. And he was a minor official at the Garden, too. After the goaltending thing ended, he became an official scorer and, the things around the Garden, goal judge, whatever needed.
And then there was Sal Messina. Sal Messina was a broadcaster with the Rangers.
Right.
But before that, he had been a goalie, a backup goalie, a minor league goalie, I'm not sure. But he worked with Marv Albert for quite some time as the radio broadcast team.
Right.
I remember was it Joe Gordon who was a Ranger announcer?
Jim Gordon,
Gordon.
Yeah. He was
Jim Gordon, the legendary announcer here in New York, did a lot of basketball, did a lot of hockey.
Right.
He was on Chadwick.
You wrote a book on Chadwick, did you not, Hal Bock?
Yes, I did, The Big Whistle.
And we've talked about him a little on previous shows a little bit. Something about him that would interest us.
Oh, I'll tell you something that'll interest you, which I learned when I wrote the book. Bill Chadwick, who was in the Hockey Hall of Fame and was considered the greatest referee of his era, had one eye. He had lost an eye in an accident on a rink. A puck hit him in the face and took away his eye as a kid. And he refereed all those years with one eye. So I thought that was remarkable.
Wow.
Yeah.
The one I remember was Red Story. Red Story was a famous NHL ref.
Yeah. Got to talk about what Al Blumkin told us off the air, and I'll let Al tell it.
They came over the breaking news on ESPN. and then on the scroll there, and then when I went to Facebook a little later, there were tons of posts on this. Roy Halladay, the two-time Cy Young Award winner, a pitcher who was a lifetime record of 209 and 103, and had fairly decent Hall of Fame credentials, was killed in the crash of his private plane in the Gulf of Mexico this afternoon. Supposedly he took off from Florida and ran into trouble, and it crashed, and he was the only passenger aboard. He left the wife and 2 children. He was 40. And he got an awful lot of money. I checked them on baseballreference.com, and they have a list of the salaries, and he did very well. He also authored in the Perfect Game in 2010. In that same season, he pitched a postseason no-hitter in an LDS game with Cincinnati. He's also a 2-time Cy Young Award winner.
And a young
and
guy.
The big thing is he led the majors and he led his league in complete games 7 times. This is when they were still completing 8 or 9 games a year. Now, not like it is now, but the guy was solid major league credentials, and the outpouring from what I've seen from the baseball community said that he was also a terrific teammate and a terrific guy.
Yeah, that's what they were saying about him down in his hometown there in Florida, how he worked with the volunteer fire department, I believe it was, and he was always available for them and whatever they needed. And, they had a couple of them on the evening news tonight talking about him.
It was really, really sad. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my comments were the emoji with the crying face. That's what I put down in response.
Yeah. Well, I hate to end it on that note, but Stan, you'll come back. We'll have a show that's more suited to your expertise. I hope you will, and I hope you'll excuse the fact that we're simply overbooked, and accept my apology. And I want you. Another of you has a book. Stan, tell us how to get your book. I talked to George about
a basketball book, I guess. Yeah, it's called The Game They Played. It was published first in 1977, and it had a lot of legs. It got a lot of play. It was the first book ever done about the basketball scandal of '51. It was published in a new edition about 25 years later. I think it was in 2001, and it had got a whole new life, new publicity. Sports Illustrated included it in its issue on the 100 best sports books of all time.
Stan,
and,
would you come back a week from tonight and talk about that? We'll devote the show to that.
Hold on, let me take a look at my calendar.
Okay.
My calendar. Next Tuesday, we're talking about November 14th.
Producer on the run here.
Okay.
Bear with us, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, yeah, I can make it next week.
Yeah, the book is terrific.
And Al knows how many books you were at a point where you were reading how many books a week?
I was a point back then I could read 3 or 4. I can't do that anymore.
But
3
or 4, and you've read a lot, so
yeah. And that
so
scandal. I was 8 years old when that scandal happened, and I knew about certain of the players that were banned because of it. But that book really produced it in detail, and had an awful lot of insight. I read it 2 or 3 times.
Stan, why don't you briefly, we're coming up to the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, and you did a great book on sports fans and the reaction to the Kennedy thing.
The man in the crowd.
The man in the crowd, right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah, that was a sports memoir in which what I did was I tracked my sports fandom, so to speak, from the time I was a kid, which was the war years, 1940s, and traced it. My father, who was a European immigrant, he got interested in baseball, and he gave it to me, and I relayed it, of course, to my son. And that book was published in 1981, and just a couple of years ago, I did a new edition of that book in which we brought in a fourth generation, which was my grandson. So it goes through four generations of sports fans and what the significance is. And I covered things in there like, it was very personal. It was written in the first person, and I dealt with all sorts of extraneous things like going to a football game the Sunday after Kennedy's assassination, and what the crowd felt like, and the first time I ever heard the entire stadium singing the national anthem out loud.
I did too. I was at the University of Pittsburgh then. I went to the Steelers Bears game at Forbes Field that Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was at the Giants. I think where they were playing
Cardinals.
The Cardinals.
Yes, the St. Louis Cardinals. And
I had an article in the New York Times about that as well. So, I did, I covered a lot of stuff like that in that book. And as I say, there was a really completely new revised edition that was done just a few years ago. So I've got a number of books that have been published twice.
Okay. Listen, I've got 4 authors here, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you individually to explain how you write a book. How do you go about it? Do you make an appointment with yourself to write for 4 hours a day, or do you write when the spirit hits you? And I'll start with you, Stan.
I have a regular, this is Stan, I have a regular schedule. I used to have regular jobs. I was in wire service, newspapers, and so forth. And when I left to write on my own, I set myself a regular schedule. And I go from about 8:30 in the morning till about 12, break for lunch, go back for another few hours. I do that regularly. And how it's done, it's very simple. You take a razor and you cut a vein and bleed the stuff out bit by bit. It's about how it works. But if I wait until the spirit moves, I only write 2-3 paragraphs a month. So I treat it as a regular job.
All right. George Grimm, how do you?
I usually set myself probably about 3 hours per day, when I'm writing something. And as far as how I write it, I kind of put my head down and empty my thoughts onto the keyboard. And then I go back and I make some sense out of it. I make sentences and paragraphs and make it look good. And hopefully it sounds good to somebody else. There's a lot of research involved, and there's a lot of, with the interviews, you have a lot of things that you have to move around to different chapters. But that's basically how I do it.
Okay. David Hubler, I'll ask you a question.
Okay. Well, the first book I did was a comic football novel, and I did that in I guess it was the mid-'80s. It's called You Gotta Believe, and NAL Signet published it. And it was based on I was much more of an avid New York Giants fan, football fan, than I am today. But at that time, the Giants were really terrible. And I remember they had one season where they just lost it's like this season, in fact. They lost just about everything. And I said, and I remember there was one game where they actually lost just at the very end of the game on some crazy end zone play. I don't even remember the details anymore. But I said, if God came down and played for the Giants, they couldn't win. And that was the premise of this novel, that this character shows up and he gets a tryout with the Giants, and although I don't even use that name because there was all this copyright stuff, but it was clear that it was the Giants, and the Maras owned it, and it just went on, and I had all these crazy ideas, and some of them have actually come to pass because now the NFL really does play abroad. My idea was that Nixon was working, Nixon had been to China, And so they were going to move the franchise to Beijing simply because they had a billion people and they could all see the games. Anyway, that book sort of just flowed out of me. I just wrote that from cover to cover. With the last book, with the Nats and the Grays, that required a lot of research and time spent looking at old newspapers. And fortunately for me, I got the contract for that shortly after my job, full-time job, had been eliminated. So I had plenty of time to do it. And I guess I wasn't as disciplined as Stan, I guess, but I sat down in the morning and started to go through some of the old newspapers, the African American and the old Washington Post and Daily News and things like that. And then I managed to write a bit each day based on what I had researched, so that I was sort of kept current with it. And it took about a year and a half to do that book.
Okay. Hal, Hal Bock, what was your procedure like?
Well, I do my best work in the morning. I like to be at the computer maybe 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. I'll work for 3 or 4 hours, take a break for lunch, and then if I feel like going back to the computer, I'll do some more work, but more likely than not, I'll spend the rest of the day doing research for my next attack of the computer. But I'll tell you a funny story about that. One of my signature books, one of the books I'm proudest about, was published in 1990, I guess. It was called The Associated Press Pictorial History of Baseball. And what we did was we had the AP photo library, which is a ton of pictures, obviously, and we had researchers in there pulling out the best pictures. And my job was to write an accompanying narrative. And I thought that's great. Let's do it. And we're getting ready to do it, getting ready to start. And I get a call, and they say, oh, it's on hold. We're not going to do it. Well, okay. Easy come, easy go. So we don't do it. And then a week or so later, I get another call. The project is back on, but the problem is this. We need the copy in a week.
Oh, God.
And it's 150 years of history we're talking about here, you know? I said, a week? They said, yes. Can you do it? And I pride myself on being a very fast writer. And I said, sure. So what I did was I would start every day at 8 o'clock in the morning. I took a week off from work, obviously. And I would start every day at 8 o'clock in the morning. And my wife was working at that time. She was doing her psychology business. And I would just work from 8 o'clock in the morning when she had left the house until 5 o'clock in the evening when she came home. And I did that every day. I was in a nest of research material. I was in front of the computer. In those days, I guess it was a typewriter. And I was surrounded by books and articles and stuff, a lot of stuff that I knew, but also a lot of stuff that I had to look up. But I got it done. I'm proudest of that project because I did it under the most difficult circumstances, and I did get it done, and it's one of my proudest achievements. The more recent
I'm going to Amazon, based on what you said, I'm going to Amazon right after this, and I'm going to pick up a copy. Still available there, right?
It's expensive these days, you know. It's an old book now.
I'm an old guy.
Will
they make some sort of special thing for me?
I think you'll have
an old book. I'm an old guy.
Yeah.
You'll find a real. By the way, happy birthday.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday, Ralph.
If it's
Happy
9
birthday,
o'clock,
Ralph.
no, it's November 8th, actually.
Oh,
8th? That's tomorrow.
But that's coming up real soon. I was born in New York, so I celebrated at 12 midnight New York time. So 9 tonight, I'm going to get my birthday present, and it's not going to be a midget riding a pony. That's what I found out. I've always wanted that. Another year of disappointment, but what do? You do the best you can. Thank you for the good wishes. It has been a pleasure. Stan, next week?
Yeah, same station, same number to call.
Say it out the way you do.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Okay.
Beautiful. See you guys, everybody. Keep on keeping on. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm honored to talk to you guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good night.
And thanks for listening, everybody. If you like the show, take some time, accumulate some lightly used children's books, put them in a carton, and take them down to the Head Start program wherever you live, whatever town you can, and get kids reading and prepared for school. And that would be nice. That would make us feel good. We're all behind that at the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Be well, everybody. Thank you again.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Very much.